All right, well, welcome. I'm Jenny Nowak with Plus One Solutions, but this is the Christina Smith Journal Club. So I'm going to let Christina take over today.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me on a Friday. I know Friday mornings sometimes are a little tricky. I apologize. I do have a cough I'm working out. So kind of want to introduce myself. I'm Christina. I am from Portland, Maine. And if you want to share your exciting news, you're welcome to. My exciting news is that my best friend had a baby last week. So that's who I get to see this weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. About myself too, I'm also a BCBA trainees. I work with Jenny as my supervisor, and we do it remotely. So it's kind of great. I'm really non-traditional. I don't work in an ABA setting, so it's nice for me to have that remote supervision. And so a little about my background. I have a bachelor's in art and social behavior science with a minor in psychology, and I'm currently completing my master's of science in educational psychology with a concentration in applied behavior analysis. Both my degrees will be from the University of Southern Maine, and I'm about halfway through my fieldwork hours. So just to give you a kind of idea of who I am, my background, where I am credentialing wise. And I like to always kind of share my experience professionally, just to kind of know where I'm coming from too, as I like to share information with you. I have about 20 years working with families and children. That includes working as a nanny, a preschool teacher, early intervention, a behavioral tech. And this past summer, I started a consulting company called Umbrella and Bag, where I offer parent and family coaching, as well as behavioral consulting services. So that's kind of where I got really interested in ACT. That kind of got me here. And so, what is ACT for ADE? What is ACT for behavior analysis? So, acceptance and commitment therapy is a form of psychotherapy and clinical behavior analysis that is action oriented, utilizing acceptance and mindfulness of all emotions to make effective behavior change. So, it was my work with parents and families and children that led me to seek out other ways to offer support to parents that got me interested in ACT. So that's kind of like that here, which as you can kind of see, working on those emotions and effective, behavior changes really are big things working with parents, especially with parent coaching and mindfulness. Those are a lot of things parents want to bring in. And when I work in their home, that's kind of what led me to this book here. And I was like, if I'm having these same conversations, I bet other people are, and I would love to have them. So I kind of want to start off with some group reflection and feel welcome to join in. So what do you know about ACT, excuse me, and has ACT been used for that you know of?
Christina, while they're thinking about that, we don't see your slides dancing.
Oh, they're not moving?
Mm-mm.
Oh, hold on.
We're still back on slide 2. Maybe stop sharing and start again. I don't know.
Yeah.
There you go. Now we see the correct one.
Right. Okay, great. Sorry about
that. So I don't mind sharing first. I'll give a little bit of my background. I'm a behavior analyst that works in the school system. I was formerly a special education teacher. I taught special education for about 10 years, autism support, emotional behavior support, and life skills for students age. The youngest I worked with was first grade, and then I worked all the way up through 8th grade. I came to ACT through some of the work that I do now. I'm the lead behavior analyst for our student services department. So we serve students aged 3 to 21 in center-based settings and self-contained classrooms. I'm also currently working on my PhD, and I just finished my comprehensive exam where I focused on ACT for staff training and burnout prevention and intervention. A lot of what we're seeing in our classrooms right now is we cannot keep staff around. The organization I work with, we hire people. Sometimes they weren't working. Sometimes they were working at Sheets on a Friday, and then we put them in our classrooms on a Monday, and then we wonder why 2 weeks later they're not there anymore. A lot of what I think is that that psychological suffering that you hear a lot about in ACT research and ACT resources. So my specific interest is in using ACT as an intervention to prevent or decrease burnout.
Wow, you're going to tell us how this
Yeah.
all works.
I
Yeah,
love that I found this book club while I was writing my comps. So I bought the book and then used a lot of the resources from here to support my comps answers. So thank you for doing this.
That is so
oh no, it's great.
cool. Go, Christina.
Well,
Timeliness.
I feel like I've been wanting to talk about this book with everyone, so I'm glad. I'm sure you probably have been too. So it's probably I'm glad I'm able to do that for you.
Yeah. I got into ACT because I had a teenage kid, college student maybe, and I used to tell her, I still tell her, it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to be happy all the time, but what are you doing with that unhappiness? And then somebody said, have you ever heard of ACT? And I'm like, I act all the time. What is, I'm like, I don't know, what does that mean? No, Jenny, this thing that we do. And so I started looking deeper into that and have just found it to be so helpful in many, many areas. I try and use it with my trainees. I try and get them to use some of the psychological flexibility while they're juggling 5,000 plates and hats all at the same time, and just find it to be really super implementable. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, so I got into ACT. Actually, I was introduced during my field work, and my supervisor had said, "Hey, have you heard about ACT? And I think this could be really useful for your clients." Just some background, I work with primarily adults with developmental disabilities. Our company has a crisis home, a transition home, an SLS, and a day program. And so we're seeing a lot of the same clients in many different settings, and a lot of the focus was on emotional regulation, utilizing coping skills in order to deal with a lot of the trauma that they have, and just a lot of the things that come up in their everyday life as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. I like that we all have different experiences. So like I work with like more younger kids, like that age 8 and younger. So I kind of like that we all have different variances. I think it's be like great for this discussion. Um, so some uses for ACT are, is it changing on this end? Sorry. Some uses for ACT have been used for depression, anxiety, addiction, chronic pain, high performance at work, as well as many other uses. It sounds like y'all gonna have had some sort of familiar base with that. And so this is a quote that I kind of shared off and I kind of want to talk about. So the quote says, knowing when to stick with something and persist in the face of hardship and when to pivot towards new patterns of behavior is at the heart of psychological flexibility. And that quality of action is the target of acceptance and commitment therapy interventions. So how do you think this quote relates to ABA, especially, I'm not sure if you, have any of you heard the article that just came out in the European ABA journal about, it was talking about navigating social media pitfalls about ABA. It was talking about how, it was talking basically like, it was basically saying like all the social media presence of ABA isn't helping like the narrative because people are just getting bad luck. So how do you think like this question about change, how do you think that, this quote relates to, the changing of ABA? And I can share that article with you a lot. Sorry with that.
I think going to the point Jennifer made earlier about like, and the book talks about this, is it's impossible to avoid all of the negative aversive stimuli in our lives. Like that's just not healthy and it's not how we evolve. So what we do have to do is pivot towards a different pattern of behavior to interact with those aversive stimuli. And one of the supervisees I work with regularly talks about just like avoiding the suck. Like things are going to suck. So how do we either make them suck a little bit less or avoid it?
Yeah.
And I do think that working on changing patterns of behavior, especially when we're consulting other staff, we can talk with them about, well, if you keep doing the same things are going to keep happening. And I think ACT allows for a tool, especially in the committed action work, to move towards a different pattern of behavior.
Yeah, that was something I noticed in the book too. And I think with ABA, we're a science that talks about testing and changing, yet our own practice doesn't want to test and change when we hear what we're doing doesn't work as a practice in science. So I think that's interesting. So I think there's sometimes we need to kind of face that hardship. And I think integrating ACT really kind of confronts that and really, it goes into the core of our values and being in the moment and confronting like, oh, is this good? Is this bad? Where do we line here? And so that was kind of my thoughts with that. All right. So the book talks a lot about aversive stimulus events, which are often private and verbal. Example that would be attending school can be overwhelming, the anxious, a private experience for a child that has no basis. So if a child going to school, they may be anxious and you can't figure out why they're anxious, but it might be because on the way to school, they see this dog every day that scares them. And suddenly this new experience that we already don't understand is now causing that. So they're having this, experience. So private events may have a different function than the observable overt behavior. So that refusal is that overt behavior we're seeing, but it really is that fear of that private event that we may not be aware that's happening. So what are your thoughts on the word use aversive? I know we always think of aversive bad. And the chapter talks a lot about the use of supporting aversive events. Aversive events are good in the sense that they create change. But what are your thoughts on the word? How do we feel the word aversive in the sense of ABA land?
Well, like Kelly was saying, it's something we can't get away from. And if we do, then I think as a civilization, we would die, right? I mean, civilizations learn how to thrive and overcome and grow and all those cool things. And that's why we're still here. Survival of the fittest. Something aversive has to happen for you to become more fit. But I don't like the word. I think our culture doesn't like the word. So yeah, I know my trainees don't like the word.
Definitely agree with Jenny. We wouldn't be able to be where we are without these aversive events, but unfortunately, the word aversive has been tied to so many of those negative things like shock. And I think that's what the criticism comes from a lot with our field is you've used all of these really aversive things, and then there's no scale to the word. It's our immediate thoughts go to those very negative things. So
Extremes.
yeah.
Yeah, I catch myself a lot using ABA jargon and my friends. I have to say, I'm using this phrase in this context, not this way when I say it to them. And but I'll say some phrases and they're like, that sounds awful. I'm like, that's not what it really means. That's what you hear, but that's not what it actually means in this scope. So the word aversive definitely is this weird thing. And I work with little kids, and the book talked about the example of the kid, touching a stove, keeping it away from a stove. But I have a burnt on my wrist, and I always say a good chef learns, they burn themselves once and they learn how to cook. That was from making chicken parm, and I will always remember that burn. But it's one of those things that it had to happen. But as I work with younger children, my natural instinct is to keep them safe, keep them protective. We definitely want to keep children away from aversive childhood experiences. But it's the balance of what, again, aversive childhood experiences are usually extreme. How do we have that balance of understanding that sometimes kids need to fall while learning to roller skate so they understand how to have balance? So it's that balance there of the word sounds scary. So I always think about that.
Kelly, did you have a thought?
I was just thinking that similar to what Amanda had said, sorry, this puppy has a lot of energy.
No worries.
Similar to what Amanda had shared is that there's certain words through the history of behavior analysis that colloquially mean something very different than they do in the context of our science. And like Skinner talks about that even in like the early chapters of Science and Human Behavior, is there certain words that like they function for a reason in our science, but outside of it, it's this idea like people immediately go to shock, like someone had shared. But there are positive uses of aversives, like avoiding aversive, like we engage in behavior so we don't have to interact with that. But I do think it is hard when we're trying to work on the social validity of our science that we do have words that have such strong like colloquial ties to them.
Yeah.
But what are we going to use instead? We also have the idea of parsimony, like we use aversive because it's a very parsimonious term for this broader spectrum.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. All right. I think so we can kind of talk about this too, but do you have any thoughts in regards to the promotion of aversive stimulus events and a code of ethics? Do you think this challenged our code of ethics at all or any way? And I think that kind of goes back to the notion of like shock therapy thoughts, but do you have any thoughts about that?
Was it in the Cooper book where they said if there were no aversives, there would be no behavior or something along those lines? And so it's,
so,
I
yeah.
mean, definitely the ethics code or code of ethics protects us from using those extreme aversives, but at the same time, like we've been reiterating, we cannot avoid aversives, and there's no way that we could teach new behaviors or even teach those adaptive behaviors if there were no aversive events we were using.
I think a systematic approach is important too, because like Greg Hanley talks about, even individuals who engage in like eye gouging, like no one's choosing to engage in that behavior, but we have individuals who are engaging in that behavior. So if there's times where we've exhausted every other opportunity to use less aversive events, and we've gotten to a point where those are not effective, there is a useful approach. It just has to be guided by our ethics and understanding of proving that everything else that we've done hasn't worked. And ultimately, our goal is to increase adaptive behavior.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit about psychological flexibility, which is the target of ACT interventions. It is the ability to stay in contact with the present moment despite what private events or external environmental factors may be impacting the behavior. So psychological flexibility is made up of 6 features: self as content, acceptance, diffusion, committed action, values, contact with the present moment. So sorry, I think I'm my notes. And so what are your thoughts? How have your thoughts changed or stayed the same with aversive stimulus events when you consider it psychological flexibility? And I can put those back up if you want, just for consideration. So thinking about these 6 features here, how you're thinking, I think we've probably already addressed this though, so we can move forward if you guys want, but have your thoughts might change or stay the same about, the word aversive events, considering these 6 features?
I can share here too. So I have a chronic illness, and I've also used ACT as like an intervention for myself to kind of deal with the aversive events. And as a lot of us have shared, like that's not something that's changing. Like it's chronic, it's going to be here forever. So I've really found that ACT, especially the committed actions and values, like I value rest now because it's what's required. And I did a lot of work on understanding like the 7 different types of rest as a committed action. I don't need to sleep to be resting. That might look different. So having those conversations almost as private events has changed that perception of an aversive. Like I'm not going to get these I'm not going to get these aversive stimuli to go away, but I can interact with them in a more flexible way and accept them as part of my day-to-day life.
Yeah, thanks for that great example. That was a really great physical way. I thought it was try to show like psychology with physical attributes if I can, because people seem to understand physical health more, but they always don't allow that same grace for mental health. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Okay, and so this is one of my quotes I shared too. There are no finite list of ACT-based procedures that are deemed behavior analytic that we can pull from and pull onto behavior intervention plans. ACT is not a one-size-fits-all intervention approach that can be applied for some fixed number of weeks to treat this or that clinical disorders. How do you think this quote relates to ABA, especially for those who may have, sorry, I have the wrong note there. So ACT is not a one size fits all intervention. So let's reflect on this in regards to the 7 dimensions of ABA. What are your thoughts on the notion of, like, I know, like, we talk about ABA shouldn't be one size fits all as well. So how do you feel about ACT also being referred to that?
I think it's that thing where as a culture, we want a program, right?
Mhm.
Give it to me in a box. Let me open the box and do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and be fixed. And ABA doesn't do that. It's the discrete trials that everybody hates about ABA, putting a little 2-year-old in the chair with your knees on both sides and the little piece of chip every time they look, chip, that type of thing that we don't like, the rigidity of it. And so it's that same thing with ACT, that we want to take it to an extreme so that I can follow the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we can't do it that way. It just doesn't, it's not functional. Doesn't produce really at the end of the day what we want it to produce. Yeah, that technological dimension is my favorite because I live with my lists, right? It's absolutely my favorite, but it also is the one that takes away all of my creativity and all of my choice making and all of those other things that makes me more human. But I ramble. Somebody else can talk.
I agree with you, Jennifer, especially working in the school setting. So many staff just want a manual to be handed where day 1, I do this, day 2, I do this, day 3, I do this. And even in our really small settings where you're working with 6 students, all of their experiences, their learning history are drastically different. Yes, they come to us with the same diagnostic criteria, the same like medical labels, but one person's emotional behavior disturbance is not another, the same as one person's autism is not the other. Yet we do kind of default to these manualized programs. And that's some of the pushback I've got. We're trying to implement AIM as a curriculum, and it is still difficult because there's some prerequisite skills required. If you do not have relational framing abilities, AIM is not appropriate for you, but staff are like, well, this was supposed to be our curriculum. So I do think it's tough to say that ACT is, I agree with it not being a one size fits all, because you can't just do ACT. And people want to do ACT, but that's such a broad spectrum of behaviors.
Yeah, Amanda, I'm going to give a plug for your program over there because I get to go on Thursdays over the hill and I work with Amanda. And what I love about what we do is we've taken these pillars, whatever they call them, the different points of the hexaflex. And instead of writing these big goals that says, Joey will do whatever 5 times and blah, 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 we say, you know what, we're just going to try and work on flexibility. And so we build kind of a little group lesson plan around opportunities to be flexible. And we just use that word. Oh, you're being flexible, right? You're bending and not breaking. Oh, you're being flexible. And, dropping the cookie on your shirt or not having the decorations for the Valentine's cookie that you want. Oh, you're being flexible, right? And so we've taken this concept of flexibility and point out how that helps all of the different choice points, pivot points in the group atmosphere. And it's like, this is just so fun, right? I love Thursdays.
I'm glad you love Thursdays.
Get to do fun things, but helping them learn this. And it's not a canned thing. It's a fun thing.
Yeah, I work with parents in home. That's always been the biggest challenge, is going in there and explaining to them that child 1, child 2 have very different needs. So we're talking about any sort of behavior planning or intervention or programming with their children of, like, I'm going to say you might have 2 different complete plans that we might work with both these kids. And the parents are like, what do you mean we're not going to do the same exact thing with both kids? I'm like, they're 2 different kids. They have 2 different needs, 2 different sets of reinforcers, 2 different sets of wants, and also emotional needs as well. So I think that's where, like, the ACT comes in, as that not one size fits all, as well as that ACT, because it has so many as well, emotional connection and mindfulness, that it can't just be one size. Amanda, do you have any thoughts that you want to add? Or
Just as you know, kind of Jenny said, even within the groups, although we're implementing ACT, it's tailored individually and as we get to know our clients more of what they can, I guess, like handle in that moment, right? We'll know how far to push that flexibility and how much to scale back. And even within the group setting, that will be different for client A versus client B. So definitely not a one size fits all, but I think that the techniques can definitely be applied to everyone in that setting. So yeah.
So Jenny mentioned this. This is kind of start talking about the models of psychological flexibility. This is the ACTS Hexaflex with positive process-based goals. So it's a functional assessment model that has been a staple within ACTS-based intervention. This model here shows, it starts the top and works clockwise. Here, you kind of start at present moment and kind of work through them all. And so, sorry, my notes right here, sorry. Looking at the ACTS Hexaflex, how can we use this and connect with ABA and our clients? Like, how do you think, we kind of already talked about this, so if you want to move a little bit, but how do you think, like, starting with our clients, how do you think we can move through and connecting with our clients, maybe building up repertoire, rapport with them or something like that?
This actually was, if you're not familiar with the comps model in a PhD program, they send you a question a week and you have to answer it. This was my first question for comps was, how do we make ACT behavior analytic? Like, how do we apply ABA language? And I think the first thing that came to my mind is observable and measurable behaviors. So what is an observable and measurable behavior for cognitive diffusion? A lot of these are private events where we rely on self-report, and we know that's like quasi-experimental. So that's one of the first challenges that I really do like how the book approached. Like, these are specific observable and measurable occurrences for each of the models of flexibility.
And the book goes into each section of its own individual later on, so we can kind of break those up later as well. So the hexagon model also can be organized. Sorry, my cat is in the way. I apologize. Can be organized into a simpler model, into higher level dimensions of openness. So openness refers to the synthetic operations of acceptance and diffusion that allows a person to be more fully make contact with positive and negative experiences in life. Or the centeredness refers to the client's present capacity to notice the contingency to operate on their behavior from a place of non-attachment and to adapt in turn. And engage refers to taking value-based actions to make those small or larger scale life changes that are needed to live a more value-driven life. So here's how that model looks. And so it breaks them up kind of, if you're going through them a little bit differently, they kind of goes through the cycle in a way that's like, kind of goes back through it. I kind of like how this 3 pillars break them up, because it breaks up in a way that understanding that it's a cycle one, but all the pillars also have different meanings to them of processing emotions. And so what are your thoughts on the 3-dimension pillars, how they're broken up here with openness, the centered, and engaged?
I think the first time that I saw the Hexaflex, it was with these 3 pillars, and it made so much more sense to me than just seeing the 6 different parts. I really like how the pillars tie together the relationships, especially like committed action and values. You can't have committed action unless you know what you value and what you're going to work towards. So that really helped me to kind of start to understand this is how they all tie together.
Yeah, same thing kind of for me, Amanda. These were words that I understood, right? When I'm working with whomever, I can say, oh, well, they're not being very open to this idea. And then I go, oh, okay, so wait a minute, maybe I should be working on some acceptance, or maybe I should be working on some diffusion. Or wow, they are so engaged over there. I wonder what's going on. I bet they value this, right? Oh, look, they're taking those committed actions. And so these words, the open, centered, and engaged, I could hang a hat on those. I knew what those words meant. And so it really opened up the organization and potential of the hexaflex for me.
Yeah, I thought visually this was much more easier to understand the hexaflex as of where like emotions were driven. And another, so let's look at this from more from a behavior analytic viewpoint. The 6 features can be aligned. The ABC contingency example from the book was in regards to a client using self-monitoring tools to record the public and private antecedents around the target behavior, such as if they were attempting to reduce binge drinking, where X comes here is a reflective tool. So what it did here is it kind of talked broken up that act's going to be broken up also as an antecedent and a consequence, looking at like what happened before in the present moment, what happened after, and as a reflection tool in the middle, which I thought was also interesting because it kind of like brought the ABA here. And I like this a lot. This, if you're, at my values, what happened before to make this thing of value to me, what happened after that reinforced that value to me. That was something I really enjoyed. So, what are your thoughts on the ABC contingency and acts so far in this behavior model you see here?
I think it ties in or reminds us that it is all about learning history, that these are all built on the 3-term contingency. And so often we look at the 3-term contingency in isolation, but our lifespan is just this never ending chain of 3-term contingencies. And we hear that a lot in school consulting of well, it comes out of nowhere, or they don't have any, they're not engaged. Well, yeah, if maybe it's because there's nothing in the environment antecedent wise that is interesting to them or ties to their values. And sorry to say, maybe you're a little boring and that's why there's no antecedent management that ties to their values that would consequently engage our learners. So I do think that it's a great way to remind people that it's tied to our learning history and it's a never-ending cycle. Those arrows go in both directions. So your consequence is going to lead back to that, which is also going to support increasing those antecedents.
Amanda, do you have any thoughts before we move on? Cool. All right. And so the next one is the ACTS matrix, which I really liked. It's kind of a simpler form. The ACTS matrix provides a framework to start. It's a framework that sees psychological flexibility as an ongoing struggle between value consistent and value inconsistent behaviors. And it's a good starting point. It talks about that. It's a little more simpler. I think for someone who's never experienced ACT, kind of hopping in and seeing it visually, it may help also a balance here. So how it breaks up here is that it uses the top more as top half as, private events, more like head, heart, explain it as, where the bottom one is more hands and feet public events. And, that middle part is where that present moment and how we're moving away and towards our values. So this is kind of a good matrix if we're trying to figure out where someone maybe are with their psychological flexibility, which I like this, but I think also, and I was debating, I was talking to Jenny, do I show this one first or show it after all the extra ones? And so I do think though, this is a tool that if someone knew nothing about acts, I could bring to another educator and show them and go, here's how we can look at this in a simpler point. And in what ways do you think you've already used it? Do you think you've already used this matrix though in some ways? Maybe not unaware of that. Maybe you've talked to a teacher being hey, I may have a note. Oh, I was writing some note. I apologize. This model is used also for used examples of how we've already used this, which talks about, changing behavior in the sense of when we're accelerating or decelerating behavior target. We want to change a behavior. I apologize, my notes a little confusing, right? I wrote confusing it for myself. I apologize. So it talks about how when we're trying to change a maladaptive behavior, decrease it or increase it, we probably have used something similar like that, but not been well aware about that. In the book, I think I left it aside. I apologize. So, but do you think you've used something similar to this in your students before that you may not have been aware of? Kind of being like, hey, what are your thoughts? Are, you know, that was a confusing presentation, so we can move on if that was confusing to what I just asked. I apologize.
Well, I've used the ACT matrix specifically for problem solving with our staff teams when there's disconnect in an intervention team. So most of our classrooms have a teacher, a couple paraprofessionals, speech pathologist, OT. There's like so many cooks in the kitchen. And there are times where you can walk in and, for lack of a less mentalistic terms, like the vibes are off. So we've sat down and gone through an ACT matrix as a team. Like, what do we value as educators, as people supporting individuals with disabilities? What are the values of this classroom? What behaviors do you engage in that maybe move you away from those values? So like, we value growth in our students. Not implementing the programs as written moves you away from that value. And it was really great because I think it takes the finger pointing away in situations like this and moves back towards a common goal and an agreement of, okay, I agree to implement the interventions as designed, not because I want to be a good person, but because I value student growth. And it is fast and it doesn't require a lot of technical language. So we get buy-in even from our like most naive staff members.
Yeah, I never actually heard of this matrix until this book. And that was something I thought I could easily present to parents in their home as a simple, here's kind of like a grid just to kind of point where they're at, to much of a visual aid to support parents and who may not understand ACTS, or it might be too much to throw a parent who's just starting kind of behavioral consulting and training with their kids.
When I first started like my sessions with my clients, we actually used this matrix, which was really neat. And so for funding purposes, we kept the goals very broad, but in their one-to-one sessions, we would say, so what's important to you? What is the thing that you want to work for? And we would talk about, okay, if you want to work for that or achieve this goal, what are some of the ways that we're going to go about that? And it was just walking them through filling it out depending on their like just what's the word? Depending on their language abilities and what they were able to conceptualize. And so some of them we would present this 4-part matrix. Others we would break it down into 2 parts of like, okay, for this first session, we're going to talk about the things we can do to get to that goal. And then the next one would be, what is it, some of the things you're doing now that kind of stops you from getting to that? And so it was really neat to see them being truthful and honest about the things that they were doing or not doing, and kind of reflecting and realizing, oh, you know what, that's true. This is what I need to do. And that's the first step. And once we get that, we work on that throughout the week of, hey, did you do X, Y, and Z to get towards, your value? So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. And so kind of before I had some closing thoughts. Another way to think of the 6 features of ACTS is a socially supported dimension of behavior. Each has a dominant functional and non-functional aspect to them. And those are motivational events, kind of think of like MOs there, overt behavioral events, and affect, which goes into acceptance. And then cognition, self, and attention. So those are all I thought was really interesting as a social approach, not just as a behavioral approach as well, which I really like that. And just quick reference, all my information here was from this book here, Acts of Movement. And so final group reflection, how are you feeling? What are your thoughts about ACT maybe so far, and anything else you want to share? You can answer any of the questions or just add whatever else you kind of want to add at this time.
I'm really encouraged by the movement in our field towards ACT and other like similar approaches, because so many times I've worked with behavior analysts in the past that have said like, oh, that's a mental health issue, not a behavior issue. And I'm like, oh my goodness, please don't say that out loud. Because, you know, mental health is behavior. It just happens to be a private event. And the book talks a lot about how we do use heuristics like that to kind of buy ourselves out of things that are hard to intervene on. Like, it is not easy to come up with an effective intervention for someone who's engaging, like has a lot of psychological suffering. But it's not okay for us to pass that off as, oh, that's not under the realm of behavior analysis. That's out of our, what we can do is attend things like this, read the text, and build our skill set and our scope of competency to be able to do something about it.
I love that, Kelly. I have been in the field for over 30 years. And back in the day, we could ABA anything because insurance was paying for nothing. So anybody who had something to fix or do better, we could go work on that. And we did. And then through the years, as the insurance and the schools needed something and saw that we had a really good answer, we've now become almost pigeonholed into autism and developmental disabilities. Which I'm thankful for, right? That gave me a really good salary for a good chunk of my career. Beautiful. But there's so much more. And we've lost, now people come and say, well, what are those periphery things that maybe ABA could work in? And it's like, those used to be the things that ABA could work in. And so, like you said, with this kind of change to back to trauma-informed care, things like ACT that are letting us look at a whole human and maybe not only a human with autism. It's kind of bringing our field back to, we really can support anybody. And I, if you can't tell, I love that.
Yeah, ACT really does feel like a revival for our field. And I am curious to see in the next 10 years where that's going to take us, especially as more people, at least this new generation of BCBA, seems a lot more open to the idea of ACT. And it's exciting for sure, but at the same time, because we've been so pigeonholed into this one scope of practice, I wonder how long it will take for the general public to view behavior analysis as like a valid tool to help with all of these other things. So
I was thinking too, ACT reminds me of that article that just came out just this past December by Penny and All, and it's called Compassion, the Eighth Dimension of ABA. Has anyone read that? And I can share it too, send out an email link, but it made me think of that, how compassion really is, compliance over compassion of compliance, but it made me think how ACT really kind of pulls that in, because it's less more of like, do what we want you to do, but also looking at, well, what value, what's important to you. So let's, look at that. So yeah. Great. And then, so before you go, our next meeting, if you want to join us, I hope you enjoy this again. This was such a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. Is March 1st. And we'll go over chapter 5, which is present moment and acceptance. And if you haven't gotten the book, the link, I made a tiny URL that you can just go right to a Amazon link. I'm not affiliate link because I cannot do that because that was too tech savvy for me. I tried it, but there it is. Just get app or BA book, and if you're not, please join the free tips and hack group. It's really great. And if you're looking for remote supervision, Jenny is a fantastic supervisor. I have her. I do not work in a traditional setting, so it has been really great for me to have that alternative opportunities to really cater my supervision to what I want to do after graduation. That really has been a benefit to me, having remote supervision. Jenny's really flexible with that, so that has been wonderful. And here's our contact information if you like to reach out to either of us. So yeah. Here's the end. Before we go, any parting thoughts anyone like to say?
Thank you for putting this together. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I'm so excited. I've been carrying this book around the last 2 months, and everyone's been hearing about it and be like, I don't want to hear about it, Christina. And they're like, can you stop? And I was like, so it's excited for me to have this group so that I can finally, talk about with people.